By those who arrange themselves in ranks, by those who drive away with a strong driving, and by those who recite the reminder.
Yeah, I mean, it is just a genuinely striking way to open a text. There's no preamble, no gentle introduction to kind of ease you into the landscape.
No, not at all. It drops you right into the middle of this intense, highly organized imagery.
Right, drops you right in. You open the text, and immediately you're confronted with this solemn oath sworn on three very distinct groups.
And just for context for everyone listening, we are looking at the opening of Surah As-Saaffat. So a surah is a chapter of the Quran, and this is the 37th chapter, specifically, looking at the first 11 verses today.
Exactly. And our mission here is to dig into a lecture by the 20th century scholar Allama Parwez.
Right, and to basically look completely past the traditional interpretations that usually surround these verses.
Yeah, because standard commentaries, well, they look at these three groups, the ones in ranks, the ones driving away, the ones reciting, and they almost universally describe them as angels.
Like literal angels in heaven.
Right. You have ranks of angels waiting for commands, or angels driving the clouds across the sky to bring rain, angels reciting divine litanies. It's treated as this purely theological vision of the unseen metaphysical world.
But Parwez argues something entirely different, right? I mean, he uses this brilliant metaphor that I love.
The derailed train metaphor.
Yeah. He says reading these opening verses through that traditional mystical lens is, it's like being on a derailed train. Or, well, a train that's been switched onto the wrong track.
And the tragic thing about a train on the wrong track is that the further you travel, the further you get from your actual destination.
Right, exactly. Every subsequent station you stop at just compounds that initial error in trajectory.
So the reorientation Parwez suggests, it really changes the entire utility of the text. He argues that this opening, it isn't about angels at all.
It's not metaphysical.
No, not even a little bit. He reads these three groups as the foundational components of a purely rational, socioeconomic, and, administrative order. We are basically looking at a blueprint for a functioning human civilization right here on Earth.
Okay, so let's unpack this. Let's look at the breakdown Parwez provides for these three groups.
Okay.
The first group is As-Saaffat.
Right. Which traditionally translates to those who range themselves in ranks.
But Parwez points to the Arabic root of the word.
Yeah.
Right? This is about the organized masses.
Yeah.
Or maybe like the military, standing in perfectly aligned ranks. It implies a society that is structured, disciplined, unified.
It's the exact opposite of a chaotic mob, basically.
Yeah, exactly.
Because, a mob has immense kinetic energy, right? But has no structure. So the energy just dissipates or destroys everything because it lacks direction.
Like a riot.
Right. Safat, on the other hand, implies that the individuals in the society recognize their positions relative to one another. They form a cohesive, functioning body.
Oh, kind of like the way certain birds fly in a V formation to reduce wind resistance.
Yes, perfect example. Or the way a Roman phalanx operated.
Yeah.
The individuals are organized for a collective purpose that actually maximizes their individual efforts.
Okay, so that's the Safat. Then you have the second group, right, the Zajirat, those who drive with strong driving, or those who repel or prevent.
Yeah. And Parwez identifies this group as the administrative or executive forces of this society.
So they're the ones actively preventing wrongdoing, like the regulatory body, the police force, the administrators.
Right. They ensure the system isn't corrupted. If someone tries to disrupt those organized ranks we just talked about, the Zajirat step in to maintain the integrity of the system.
Notice the active nature of that role, too. They don't just sit back and passively observe the decay of order.
Well, yeah, because entropy is a fundamental law of the physical universe, you know? Things naturally move from order to disorder unless energy is applied to maintain the structure.
Right. And the Zajirat are that applied energy in a social context. They're like the societal immune system. They drive away the harmful elements before those elements can rot the structure from within.
Exactly. And then you have the third group, the Taliyat, those who recite the reminder.
Which, in a mystical context, you'd picture monks or angels chanting hymns.
Right. But Parwez grounds this completely in the socio-political reality. The reminder here is the Constitution. It's the law of the land, the core principles of the society.
So the Taliyat are the citizens who are actively reading and understanding it.
And following it, most importantly, they keep that foundational code alive in the daily operations of the society.
So Parwez is basically outlining the three essential pillars of any enduring civilization here.
He is. You need the structured, organized populace, the Safat. You need the executive branch with the power to enforce the law, the Zajirat. And you need a citizenry intimately familiar with the Constitution, the Talyat.
Because if any one of those three is missing, the whole system collapses, doesn't it?
Oh, absolutely. An organized populace without a constitution just becomes a machine without a purpose. And a constitution without an executive force, that's just a mere suggestion.
Okay, but wait, let me push back here for a second. Human beings aren't, cells in a biological body.
Sure.
When humans are forced into rigid ranks,
Yeah.
historically, that leads straight to authoritarianism and the complete loss of free will. I mean, we saw this in the 20th century. Fascist regimes were incredibly organized.
That's true, they were.
They had Safa people marching in perfect ranks. They had terrifying Zajirat secret police driving away dissent. So how does Parwez reconcile this vision of, perfect ranks with actual human freedom? Are we just talking about a society of cogs in a totalitarian machine?
That is the crucial question, right? And the distinction really lies in the origin and nature of the reminder, the law that the Talyat recite.
Okay, how so?
Well, in an authoritarian regime, the ranks are organized for the benefit of a dictator or a ruling class. The law is arbitrary. It just changes based on the whim of whoever's in power, and compliance is extracted entirely through fear.
Right, the ranks are imposed from the top down just to extract labor or obedience.
Exactly. But Parwez argues that this Quranic blueprint requires a rational, universally beneficial law. So the society organizes itself voluntarily because the individuals recognize that the Constitution actually protects their own human dignity and potential.
So it's not a dictatorship. What he's describing sounds more like a cooperative matrix.
Yeah, it's about systemic integrity based on rational consent. When the components of a society actually understand their roles, it doesn't create a dystopia. It creates the necessary conditions for human flourishing.
Because you can't really achieve your full potential in a state of constant chaos or vulnerability.
Right. The structure isn't there to oppress you. It's the scaffolding that allows the building to stand tall.
Okay, I buy that.
Yeah.
But if the law guarantees freedom by restricting arbitrary power, who writes the law? Like, how do we prevent the lawmakers from becoming tyrants themselves? Who is at the top of this flowchart directing the Zajirat and the Safat?
And that naturally brings us to verse 4, which states, "Verily, your God is one."
Which sounds like standard theology at first glance.
Right. Usually this is the concept of tawhid, the oneness of God, which is treated strictly as a creed. You confess it in your heart to distinguish yourself from polytheists. But Parwez asks the reader to view this through that socio-political lens.
So he's saying Tawhid is fundamentally a political claim here.
Exactly. It's a statement of jurisdiction.
Oh, wow. Okay. So it means there is exactly one source of law.
One governing principle for the entire system.
Let's test that theory, actually. Let's look at what happens when a society lacks that singular jurisdiction. Because historically, societies are often deeply fragmented, right? You have one set of laws for the monarchy or the political elite, another for the priesthood, and then completely different rules for the common people.
Yeah, often divided even further by caste or economic class. And the French Revolution is probably the perfect historical case study of the failure of fragmented jurisdiction.
So the three estates.
Exactly. Pre-revolutionary France was divided into the first estate, which was the clergy, the second estate, the nobility, and the third estate, which was everyone else, the peasants, the workers. And they did not operate under one unified law.
Right, because the clergy and nobility had their own courts. They were basically exempt from all the taxation that was just crushing the third estate.
And when a system's fundamental rules change, depending on who you are, it is inherently irrational. It can't sustain itself. The internal pressures of that injustice will eventually tear the structure apart.
Which is exactly what happened in France.
Right. The system lacked tawhid in a political sense. So Parwez points out that declaring God is one in this structural blueprint is actually this massive revolutionary act of leveling the playing field.
It abolishes the idea that the king has a divine right that supersedes the law.
Yes, or that the priest has some special pipeline to the truth that a common citizen can't access. Everyone, from the highest executive in the Zajirat to the newest member of the organized Safat, is subject to the exact same unified, rational principle.
It's basically the ultimate anti-corruption mechanism at the foundational level.
Right.
You can't appeal to a different god or a different set of divine rules to justify exploiting the system.
Right.
I mean, the fall of the Roman Empire shows the exact same vulnerability. In its later stages, Roman law became incredibly bifurcated.
Oh, definitely.
The wealthy patricians effectively operated under a completely different legal reality than the plebeians. And when that unified law collapsed in competing jurisdictions of regional warlords and corrupt senators, the whole civilization fractured.
And Parwez actually connects this political necessity directly to the verses that immediately follow. The text expands on the domain of this singular law. Verse 5 says, "He is the Lord of the heavens, the earth, and all that is between them, and the Lord of the points of sunrise."
Okay, the points of sunrise. I'm going to pause here because the phrase uses the Arabic word masharik, which is plural. And Parwa spends a lot of time on this specific detail, right?
He does, because, to a casual ancient observer standing in a field, the sun just rises in the east, singular. But astronomically, the exact point on the horizon where the sun rises changes every single day.
Right, due to the Earth's orbit and axial tilt.
Yeah. From the summer solstice to the winter solstice, that point of sunrise is constantly shifting along the horizon. So there isn't one sunrise, there are countless points of sunrise.
Which is wild because ancient cultures were often terrified by this dynamic movement. I mean, they built massive monuments like Stonehenge, literally just to track it.
Yeah, because they feared that if the sun kept moving along the horizon, it might just disappear entirely one day.
Yeah.
They saw the changing cosmos as this source of anxiety that required constant appeasement and rituals.
But Parwez notes how the Quran treats this dynamic complexity, right? Not with fear, but as evidence of order.
Exactly. He draws a direct parallel between the physical universe and the socio-political order. The cosmos is incredibly complex. It's dynamic, ever-changing. You have countless celestial bodies moving in these intricate patterns, creating multiple points of sunrise. Right. Yet despite all that complexity and constant movement, it never devolves into chaos. The universe doesn't just crash into itself.
Because it operates under one unified physical law.
Right.
I mean, the law of gravity applies to a pebble on Earth exactly the way it applies to a gas giant a million light years away. There are no competing jurisdictions in physics.
Exactly. The singular governing principle ensures that the dynamic complexity of the universe results in harmony. And Parwez argues that human civilization must operate the exact same way.
Because a healthy society isn't static, right? It grows, it faces technological revolutions, new resources.
It encounters new sunrises every day. But if it's going to avoid the fate of Rome or pre-revolutionary France, it has to be anchored by one unified constitutional law. The physical universe proves that a singular governing principle is really the only way to manage a complex, dynamic system without it collapsing into entropy.
Okay, but if one unified law guarantees stability, what happens when a bad actor tries to hide in the dark? Because no system, no matter how beautifully designed, is immune to people trying to exploit it. How does this blueprint protect itself from internal rot?
Well, verse 6 introduces the imagery of the defended heaven. It says, "Indeed, we have adorned the nearest heaven with an adornment of stars."
The Arabic term is sama adunya, right? The lower heaven or the sky nearest to us.
Right. And Parwez actually makes this really interesting aesthetic observation here before moving to the structural meaning. The sky is described as decorated or adorned. It isn't described as a terrifying, intimidating void designed to frighten humanity into submission.
Which makes sense. The psychological impact of the universe, when you look at it correctly, should be awe at its beauty and order.
Yeah, the deep navy blue of the night sky punctuated by starlight is universally calming. Parwez is saying that a rational order is inherently beautiful.
But the very next verse says this beautiful decorated sky is also fiercely guarded. It's protected from every rebellious shaitan.
Yeah, and the word shaitan is typically translated as a devil or a demon. But Parwez translates this cosmic imagery straight into concrete governance terms.
So what does that look like?
The decorated sky represents the rational, constitutional order made visible. It's the society functioning at its best, totally transparent and illuminated. The shaitan, in this socioeconomic reading, represents any force, internal or external, that seeks to rebel against the unified law for selfish gain.
Okay, I see the logic, but I really want to explore the mechanics of this defense. How does a visible, decorated sky actually repel a rebellious force? Like, what is the practical equivalent of this boundary in modern economic or governance terms?
So Parwez suggests that in a perfectly rational system, corruption is actually expelled before it can disrupt the core operations. The defense mechanism isn't a reactionary police force that scrambles to investigate after a crime has been committed.
Oh, the structure of the system itself is inherently hostile to irrationality.
Yes. Think about transparency as the actual defense mechanism.
Wow, okay. The 2008 financial crisis comes to mind as the exact opposite of this.
Oh, that's a perfect example. Walk us through that parallel.
Okay, so the 2008 crisis was built on deliberate obfuscation. You had these massive financial institutions creating collateralized debt obligations, CDOs. They took thousands of high-risk subprime mortgages, bungled them together, and had rating agencies stamp them as AAA, incredibly safe investments.
Right, but no one actually knew what was inside those financial products.
Exactly, because the system was totally opaque. There's no decorated sky. It was this dark, murky system where extreme risk was deliberately hidden from the investors, the public, and even the regulators.
So the shaitan, the irrational, greedy force seeking to bypass the rules of sustainable economics, they thrived because the system was completely unilluminated.
Yeah. And when the underlying mortgages started defaulting, the entire global economy nearly collapsed because the irrationality had been allowed to fester in the dark.
Right.
Now, if that system had operated like the decorated sky, if every single mortgage inside those CDOs had been publicly visible, accurately rated, and fully transparent, the greedy actors wouldn't have been able to sell them.
Because the sheer transparency of the environment would have immediately exposed the toxic assets.
Exactly. The market's normal functioning would have rejected them long before they became systemic threats.
So the guarding of the system is the transparency itself. A rational civilization, built on the singular law, illuminates everything. It makes the irrational impossible to hide.
But how does the system deal with those who actively try to bypass this transparency using privileged information? Because the text doesn't just stop at the boundary. It describes the actual fate of those who try to breach it.
Yeah, verses 8, 9, and 10 describe these rebellious forces attempting to listen to the higher assembly. They're trying to eavesdrop on the celestial command center. But they are repelled from every side, driven away, and if any of them manages to snatch a fragment of information, they are pursued by a piercing meteorite.
Which, I mean, the traditional mythological reading of that is incredibly cinematic. Literal demons flying up through the clouds to press their ears against the floorboards of heaven, trying to hear the angels discussing the future.
And God throwing literal shooting stars at them to chase them away.
Right. But Parwaz grounds this entirely in the history of human power dynamics, doesn't he?
He does. He links these eavesdroppers specifically to astrologers, fortune tellers, and basically anyone who claims to possess exclusive insider knowledge of destiny.
Wait, why does Parwaz single out astrologers in a discussion about socioeconomic systems?
Because for thousands of years, astrologers represented the ultimate bypass of the rational system. Think about it. Human societies operate on cause and effect, effort and reward within the bounds of law.
Sure.
If a farmer wanted a good crop, he had to study the soil, track the seasons, put in the hard labor. But the astrologers offered a really dangerous shortcut. They claimed to have special access to the higher assembly, the movement of the stars, which supposedly dictated human destiny.
Oh, I see. So they were selling the illusion that the rational rules of cause and effect didn't apply to you if you just knew the secret cosmic code.
Exactly. Kings would halt military campaigns just because an astrologer saw a comet. Entire empires would shift economic policies based on planetary alignments.
They hoarded power by convincing the public that the transparent, rational world was actually controlled by hidden, mystical forces that only the astrologer could interpret.
It was a mechanism of profound psychological and political control. They basically held society hostage to irrationality.
So what is the meteorite that pursues them in Parwaz's reading?
The meteorite represents the fire of knowledge. As human understanding of the cosmos expanded, as we developed astronomy and astrophysics through figures like Copernicus and Kepler, we realized the stars were not divine commanders of our fate.
They were just rocks and gas.
Right. They were, in Parwaz's words, just dead dust bound by physical laws.
And that scientific knowledge acted exactly like a meteorite crashing into the institutions of astrology. It completely obliterated their monopoly on power.
Yeah. The piercing meteorite isn't a magical punishment. It's the inevitable collision of objective reality with superstition. When you shine the light of scientific and rational inquiry onto these hidden, irrational power structures, they just disintegrate.
Which means we can draw a direct line from the ancient astrologer to modern equivalents. Because the fundamental behavior, bypassing the open system for personal gain, that remains exactly the same.
Oh, 100%.
Insider trading in the stock market operates on the exact same psychological and structural premise.
That is a great comparison.
Because the public financial market requires you to do the research, take the risk, and play by the same transparent rules as everyone else. But the insider trader acts like the eavesdropper. They try to snatch a piece of privileged, hidden information like an upcoming merger or an unreleased earnings report to guarantee their own success and manipulate the outcome, bypassing the fair system entirely.
And what's the consequence for the insider trader?
Well, the consequence is built directly into the act. The regulatory bodies use the transparency of the financial data to track the anomaly. When an individual makes a massive, perfectly timed trade right before a major corporate announcement, the data leaves a trail.
A data trail that can't be hidden.
Exactly. The audit, the investigation, that undeniable data trail, that is the fire of knowledge that crashes into their scheme.
Yeah.
If you refuse to operate within the open, rational system, the sheer transparency of that very system will hunt you down like a meteorite.
It really will. And submitting to irrational workarounds, whether it's consulting a fortune teller or engaging in corrupt insider trading, it's a failure to utilize the rational intellect that makes human civilization possible in the first place.
Right.
Parwaz makes this deeply philosophical point here about human nature and our relationship with the cosmos. He compares humanity to the stars, focusing on the concept of kapizinda, which means living dust.
Because the astrologers wanted humans to submit their destiny to the stars. But Parwa says this is completely backward.
It is backward. The stars, massive and brilliant as they are fundamentally dead matter. They're entirely deterministic. A star has no choice but to follow its orbit, to burn its fuel, to obey the law of gravity without deviation. It cannot choose to change course.
But human beings are made of the same physical material, right? The carbon, iron, calcium forged in those stars.
Yes, but we are living dust. We possess consciousness, intellect, and free will.
We have the capacity to actually choose to align ourselves with the rational order or to rebel against it.
Therefore, Parwaz argues, it is a profound insult to human potential to suggest that a conscious being with free will should submit to the dictates of a dead, deterministic ball of gas. We are not subservient to the cosmos. We are the conscious edge of it.
Wow. This all sounds incredibly sociopolitical and philosophical, but the verses don't actually stop at the meteorites. The text takes this really sudden turn into biology.
It does.
Verse 11 introduces sticky clay. The Arabic phrase is tinin lazib, and Parway spends a massive amount of time on this specific phrase, and it fundamentally alters how we view the entire 11-verse structure.
It's basically the crucial anchor for his entire argument. Parwaz points out that sticky clay represents the biological progression of life. It points to the combination of water and soil, the primordial conditions required for the emergence of cellular biology.
We're talking about the early Earth here, the chemical soup where silicates and organic compounds began to organize.
Exactly.
But why introduce the biochemical origins of life right after talking about stars, meteorites, and socioeconomic ranks?
To establish the continuum of law. Parwaz is demonstrating that there is no separation between the physical laws of the universe, the biological laws of evolution, and the social laws of human civilization.
They're all connected.
Yes. The physical evolution from chaotic chemical elements into sticky clay and eventually into complex, conscious human beings is a highly organized, rational progression governed by physical laws.
And the sticky clay implies adhesion, right? Things coming together to form a more complex structure. Single cells forming multicellular organisms, forming tissues, organs, systems.
Exactly as the Saaffat come together to form an organized society. Parwaz integrates this biological reality to prove that the entire system is unified. The laws that cause atoms to bond in sticky clay are the same rational principles that dictate how humans must bond to form a society.
Oh, I see. So if the biological body fails when its organs rebel against the unified genetic code, which we call cancer, then the social body fails when its members rebel against the unified constitution.
That's the exact parallel. The development of a society from a chaotic mob into an organized civilization with one law is an evolutionary imperative. It is the social equivalent of evolving from single-celled organisms in the mud to a conscious human being.
So if we fail to organize rationally, we're basically devolving.
Exactly. This 11-verse opening is not just a poetic prologue. It's the fundamental blueprint. It is the description of what a working, rational order looks like, from the molecular level all the way to the celestial orbits, culminating in human civilization.
It's all one continuous system.
Right. And Parwaz argues that if you don't understand the blueprint of the rational system presented in these first 11 verses, you won't understand the nature of the conflicts that the rest of the surah describes, because the messengers that follow are constantly fighting against societies that have abandoned this rational order for tyranny and superstition.
Man, this framework really forces you to take this text out of the realm of abstract theology and apply it directly to the structures you live in every single day.
It absolutely does.
Let's synthesize the journey we've taken here, because we've covered a lot. We started with the foundational requirement, ranks that actually function. A society needs organized masses, executive protectors, and citizens dedicated to the Constitution.
The Saaffat, the Zajirat, and the Talyat.
Right. Then we move to Tawhid as a political claim. One unified law with no competing jurisdictions, mirroring the unified laws of the dynamic physical universe. We explored the necessity of a decorated sky, a transparent, beautiful system inherently hostile to corruption.
The transparency that repels the shade.
Exactly. And we saw the self-expulsion of the eavesdroppers, the disruptors who try to bypass the system with insider knowledge, only to be crushed by the meteorite of objective truth. And finally, the sticky clay, proving that this social organization is as deeply rooted in the fabric of reality as our own biological evolution.
It's a staggering vision of systemic integrity.
It really is. And for everyone listening, when you look at the organizations you interact with, the company you work for, the local government you live under, the legal system in your country, do they reflect this blueprint? Do they have clear ranks and functions where people actually know their roles and are protected by them?
Are they governed by a unified, consistently applied set of rules, or are there competing jurisdictions and special favors for the elite?
Does the system naturally expel irrationality and corruption through absolute transparency? Or does it reward the modern eavesdroppers, the people who hoard insider knowledge and exploit the dark corners of the system for personal gain?
Those are the true metrics of systemic integrity. And if the fire of knowledge is meant to act as a meteorite against superstition and corruption, well, we are faced with a profound modern dilemma.
How so?
We have built systems of incredible complexity. But if a society requires transparency to defend itself, what happens when the Zajirat, the administrators and enforcers of our ranks, are increasingly handed over to artificial intelligence?
Oh, wow.
If we delegate the enforcement of our laws and the tracking of our data to black box algorithms that even their creators don't fully understand, we lose the visible, decorated sky.
Because the transparency is gone.
Exactly. We must ask ourselves, in our rush to optimize society through AI, are we fulfilling this ancient blueprint of a rational, unified order? Or are we simply creating a brand new digital astrologer that operates in the dark, demanding our blind submission while we completely lose the ability to see the sky?